Hello everyone, and welcome to another decisions training video. Today we're going to be going over one of our newer features, the flex layout. So first we're going to start by providing an overview of what the flex layout is and what it does. Afterwards, we'll highlight why the flex layout is such a powerful control inside of the form designer. And once we've established what it is and why it's important, we'll cover its properties and how they function. After covering these properties, we'll walk you through how to configure them to achieve certain behaviors in the form during runtime. And lastly, we'll go over the best practices to follow when implementing Flex Layout in your form. So the Flex Layout is a responsive layout control that allows designers to build adaptive, cleanly aligned forms. It enables responsive design by allowing controls to adapt automatically to both screen size and content length. Unlike the traditional fixed grid layout, Flex Layout gives designers greater control over responsiveness and alignment without needing multiple nested containers. Flex Layout is ideal for forms that must be responsive or dynamically aware of their content. It functions not just as a layout system, but as a behavior engine that's capable of adjusting to user input, data visibility, and varying screen dimensions. For example, suppose you need a form to be viewed across a range of screen sizes and ratios. With the Flex layout, form controls can wrap and scale based on screen width by utilizing justify, wrap, and alignment settings. Or suppose you want to add optional fields that will appear or vanish based on a user's input. Well, Flex can automatically reflow content when fields are shown or hidden. So, to really drive this point home, the main benefits of Flex Layout are that 1, it maintains a user-friendly layout whenever the form is resized. 2, it can dynamically rearrange form controls to fit different resolutions. And 3, you have more regulation over form control location when altering visibility. So let's go over the layout itself. When you first put in a flex layout, you're going to notice this 12 columns property. It's going to have a default height of 600 and a lot of properties on the right side that you can configure even before you start adding form controls into it. The columns property specifies the number of unitless columns that span across the form horizontally. For example, in a 6-column form, you will have 6 slots in which form controls can fit, though often controls can take up more than one slot. The default for this setting is going to be 12. Next, we have the height type. This specifies where the height of the form is fixed or flexible. In a fixed height form, the form's height at runtime is set to a specified value in pixels. This is great when you want your form to appear as the same size during each run. But please note that this doesn't mean that the user at runtime cannot change the height of the form. It just means that during each run, it starts at the same height. Flexible height allows the height of the container to adjust based on the content. This means it can size itself at runtime depending on how many pixels your form controls take up vertically. You can also set boundaries for the flexible height, preventing it from auto-sizing above or below specified heights in pixels. Next, we have our positioning, and we're going to start by going over justify content. This is how the form controls are spaced horizontally within each row. So, by default, they are set to the left. However, as you can see, we could click to center them and they would all be in the center of this, or we can space them evenly and that would put spaces between each of the form controls for the rows inside of your flex container. The align items within rows sets how the form controls are spaced vertically within each row. You can imagine an invisible bisector between each row from which the form controls are spaced. By default, they will be on flex start. However, you can change these to have them centered. You can stretch them out or other options as well. We will be showing this off in our demo. And the last positioning option is aligning content. This is going to set how the rows themselves are spaced inside of the form. So, do you want all of the rows to be pushed to the top of the form, as by default? Or maybe you want to set them to the end where they're pushed to the bottom. You have centering and spacing around as well. Every option that you have for justify content for the individual controls horizontally, you have that option to space the rows vertically. So how do you control the resizing? Well, the primary means by which the flex containers achieve resizing is by establishing the container width in columns, for example, 12 columns, and then establishing the form control width in pixels. So let's say that you set up a form that is 4 columns and you have 2 controls that are each 2 columns wide. Well, if I were to change the size, that would not allow my controls to wrap because even though the 2 columns have each gotten smaller, the 4 columns, the size of the form, is going to get smaller as well. And each of those are designed to take up those 2 measureless units. So the way that we actually get stuff to realign is when we set our controls in pixels, either as fixed or as flexible. So now, when those 4 columns shrink, those 200 pixel wide controls still stay 200 pixels wide. But that second one isn't going to fit at the end of this form anymore. It's extending out of it. So the flex layout sees that and it places that particular control on the row beneath. That is how you achieve resizing in the flex layout. So now let's go into our decisions environment now, where we're going to talk about how to manipulate and set up these flex layouts to achieve your desired results. Here I am inside of the decisions environment. I have already run a flow that displays a form that is in flex layout. And the first thing I want you to notice about Flex is that it allows you to dynamically resize and rearrange the other controls when action visibility rules are applied to the form itself. I'm going to be walking you through how to set up something like this in a moment, but I want to make sure that you understand what the Flex layout does. So first of all, when you are hiding and showing controls with active form flows, you have the ability to shift the other controls around it based upon those visibility rules. Notice also that all controls are shifting away from the center. Let me go inside of this form and show you what's happening. So here I am inside of the form designer. By clicking on the background, you'll be able to see that we have access to all of the Flex properties here for how the content is going to be arranged. I have all the content pushed to the top of their row. I have all of it adjusted to the left side of the form when possible, and the aligned content is going to be centered. This is what allows all of our controls to move outwardly from the center whenever you check one of the visibility rules that hides and shows these 2 controls. If I change this to top, you'll see that all of these particular controls get shifted up slightly, and at runtime, this happens instead. You'll see that only controls get pushed down. All of these other controls are already aligned to the top as much as they can be. Now watch what happens when I go to the Align Items section and start changing these settings. When I move these to the bottom, you're going to see that only a few controls shift. That is the drop down and this particular button right over here. That is because for the top row, these 2 controls are the same. So they are not going to shift relative to each other. The height of this row is the height of whatever the tallest control is. And because they are the same, they're not going to shift. But for this next row, where the drop down is a larger control than the little checkbox here, you'll see that by selecting this, that checkbox moves within that row. Same thing if I click center. Now, when I click stretch, This is going to move the controls outward to try and fill the space that was left by these other ones here. So this is now taking up as much space as this. This drop down now takes up as much space vertically as the shoe size. And then when I go to justify content, this determines if it moves all the controls to the left side within their rows, to the right side, centered, or space evenly and space around. Space evenly means that it's going to try to put the same amount of space between each control to preserve this centering. Space around means that each control gets the same little bubble around it. So you can think if this control has a 10 pixel margin and a 10 pixel margin on the right, and this control has a 10 pixel margin on the right and 10 pixel margin on the left, then technically there's 20 pixels in the middle, not 10. That's what space around does, is it makes sure that that little bubble around the control, specifically on the left and right, remains the same for each control. And then space between means it pushes the controls to the borders and tries to space other controls between it. So that's how you can affect the alignment of your content when you are using a flex grid. I'm now going to go into another example of how to design well inside of a flex grid. So let me go over to another form now. So here I have a form that is going to take in address info, personal info, and then payment info, either by credit card or by bank. Each of these is its own flex control inside of a large flex control layout. So that means when I stretch these individual controls can get rearranged inside of the flex layout because this overall flex will move them for you. And as I shrink them as well, you'll see that it shrinks these controls as well. It's not creating a scroll bar yet. Now notice something. When I'm shrinking these, it's affecting the size of these controls inside of the flex layout. Specifically, look at first name and last name and watch what happens when I move it closer. They both shrink. What we are doing is we are applying different rules for these controls inside of their own flex layout. And by doing that, you have more control over these individual elements inside of the form. Now, they rearrange when I stretch them out. In fact, I can stretch them out so far that each one of these controls will take up the space. And the submit button moves to the bottom. I still have my action visibility rules over here. And in fact, a very cool one I'd like to show you is when I change this from credit card to bank, notice that it moves the submit button up and down. That's what's going to allow for that control to compress, is that flex layout. So I'm going to go in this now and show you how this is built, as well as how to change it and how to get this rearranging behavior. So here's my flex grid, and here are the properties. I have centered each one of these controls within this particular outer grid, and each one of these flex layout grids has its own rules. It has a height type that is flexible, so it can change its size up and down. Same thing with this one right here, and then same thing with this one right here. Notice that each of these has a width type of flexible. This is what allows it to rearrange as a control. If the form were to get big enough where it could fit multiple controls of that width, then it will put both flex layouts next to each other. And then if it shrinks too much, that's when they all have to get stacked vertically. If I wouldn't want that behavior, I would change this width type from flexible to column. Column would let us specify how many measureless units across we want this control to take up out of the total form columns. Now, notice that the outside one has 12 columns. So when I specify this inner one to be 12, I'm taking up all that space horizontally. And if I do this with these other ones as well, notice now when I stretch this out, none of these get rearranged. They continue to stretch with the size of it. instead of trying to fit next to each other. Intermingling with types of column and flexible or fixed together is what allows your form to dynamically rearrange controls. That is the key to its success. You have certain columns that are always going to match whatever ratio the flow expands to, and you're going to have some form controls, such as this one right here, that can move between certain parameters, but it has certain limits. So therefore, it can get rearranged, or another one can get slid next to it if you can fit multiple of those controls next to each other after the form size is changed. Again, that is the key to allowing your flex form to rearrange controls. For example, you'll notice that for routing number, account number, and bank/credit union, all of these are in column width 4. 4 plus 4 plus 4 adds up to 12, right? That's how many total columns there are in this. So no matter how much I resize this, these three are going to take up the total width. However, if I change these to fixed, and I say this width is 200, and I change this to fixed, and I say this width is 200, and I change this to fixed, and I say this width is 200. Now, when I stretch it out, these three can stretch along that when there is enough space, or if I shrink it so much, they'll have to go vertical. Again, this is the key to allowing your particular flex layout to achieve its highest functionality of rearranging columns. Again, this is the key of achieving the best results with your flex layout. Now, something I want to go over is with this preferred contact dropdown. Just a few moments ago, I showed you how when you changed this, it changed the particular form control that's shown between email, phone number, or please specify. That is achieved through an active form flow in the background that is just setting visibility rules on it. However, notice I put all three of these on here. You have to account that when you are trying to hide and show controls, how they are going to appear when flex layout is enabled. So I've used it to my advantage, knowing that if one of them is showing and the other two disappear, then this one will get shifted the most to the left. Then the visible control will get shifted most to the left and closest to the preferred contact. So that way, it looks like each one of these is getting replaced in the same place inside of the form. Let me show you that once more. So you see how in preferred contact, we have email right here. If I change this to phone, phone appears, and if I change it to other appears. This control can take up the space of the other two and slide into such a slot where it would fit within the row above it. And even when I change the size of this, it's still going to be the closest control to this drop down depending on where I move this. Is the one immediately after, and when I change it around, it changes to a different control. You can do this with more than just a control that takes in input data. In fact, you can do this with entire grid layouts, header containers, and other controls as well. So I could even hide a whole flex layout such as bank or credit card info until a user selects something from the grid above it. And this form can be designed to shrink whenever that is not selected. So this is how you design flex layout forms inside of decisions. Before we end this video, I'd like to cover some best practices when making flex layout forms. And the very first and most important one is to start with the plan. When you are creating a flex layout, unlike the grid layout, which is going to have you just slot things into predetermined grids that have already been set up for you from the beginning, Flex requires a knowledge and a plan of how the controls are going to both be placed statically and how they'll interplay with each other with visibility rules. The next thing is you'll want to use stretch and align items for height consistency. As shown before with align items, you can stretch controls to match each other. This can become very important when you're using different kinds of controls in the same row, or have the potential for one control that is not of the same height to slide into another row when the form changes size. So, by using the stretch and align items, you have the ability to mitigate or remove this height inconsistency entirely. Next is what I already emphasized. When you combine with types of column and flexible or fixed, it can allow for a more balanced layout and allow your particular form to be resized in the way that you want it when visibility rules are applied and when the form changes size. Next, you'll want to nest layouts for control groups. So when you have certain sections with similar information going into them, it is best to try to nest those together inside of a flex layout, inside of your main flex layout. That way you can control how each section behaves with its own flex nesting rules. You can also nest other layouts to accomplish this as well, such as a grid layout, a header container, a vertical stack, among many others. That being said, you do want to avoid over nesting. If you have too many nested flex layouts, each with their own set of align content rules and justify content rules, so on and so forth, sometimes it can give unintended results because you may not have accounted for one of the nesting layers in the middle. Even if it's all using the same controls, it could slide over everything more than you intended. So you don't want to over nest. And then the last two things that you want to avoid are setting all shrink values to 0 and all growth values to 0. Shrink and grow ratios on a particular form control determine at which percentage more or less that a control is going to resize compared to its sister controls inside of the flex grid when the flex form is changing size. If you set all shrink values to 0 and no control is allowed to shrink, controls will not contract when the space is limited, and it can break the layout or cause an overflow that was unintended. And you also don't want to set all grow values to 0 because if no control can grow, then available space is not going to be distributed and you can run into controls not aligning evenly. By default, these are each set to 1 whenever you have a flexible width, meaning that all controls resize with the same ratio. However, you can change this if you want certain controls to resize larger or to shrink less when the main form is changed. So that's how you utilize and design with the flex control layout inside of Decisions. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope this helped.